The group that I chose was Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a Shia, or also known as Shiite, Islamist political party and militant group that's based out of Lebanon. It was founded in the early 1980s as part of an Iranian effort to aggregate a variety of Muslim militant Lebanese Shia groups into a unified organization. Hezbollah was conceived by Muslim clerics and funded by Iran primarily to harass Israel and the Jews. Its leaders were followers of Ayatollah Khomeini. The three main founders of this group were Imad Mughni, Ali Akbar Motashamipur, and Mohammad Hussein Fadlallah. The current leader of Hezbollah is Hassan Nasrallah, and his predecessor was Abbas al-Musawi. Hassan is currently the third Secretary General of Hezbollah. So when we look at the beginning of Hezbollah in the 1980s, they emerged in South Lebanon during a consolidation of Shia militias as a rival to the older Amal movement. Hezbollah played a significant role in the Lebanese civil war that occurred, opposing the American forces in 1982 to 1983, and opposing Amal in Syria during the 1985 to 1988 War of the Camps. However, Hezbollah's early primary focus was ending Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon. This was followed by Israel's invasion and siege of Beirut in 1982. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon, and after that invasion, Israel occupied a strip of South Lebanon. It was controlled by the South Lebanon Army, also known as the SLA, which is a militia supported by Israel. Amal, which was mentioned before, was the main Lebanese Shia political group, and they actually initiated guerrilla warfare as well. Guerrilla warfare is a form of irregular warfare in which a group of combatants, such as paramilitary personnel, armed civilians, or irregulars using military tactics, which includes ambushes, sabotages, raids, petty warfare, hit-and-run tactics, and mobility to fight a larger and less mobile traditional military. When it comes to Hezbollah in the 1990s, Hezbollah transformed from a revolutionary group into a political one, in a process which is described as the Lebanonization of Hezbollah. Unlike its uncompromising revolutionary stance in the 1980s, Hezbollah conveyed a lenient stance toward the Lebanese state. When we talk about their tactics and how they go along to terrorize other people and other groups, they waged an asymmetric war, and they used suicide attacks against the Israeli Defense Forces, also known as the IDF. And they also took Israeli targets outside of Lebanon as well. They were reputed to have been among one of the first Islamic resistant groups in the Middle East to use the tactics of suicide bombings and assassinations and capturing foreign soldiers and murdering and hijacking them as well. Hezbollah also employed a more conventional military tactics and weaponry, one of those being the Katyusha rockets and other missiles as well. So the Katyusha rockets are a type of rocket artillery that was first built and founded by the Soviet Union in World War II. They are able to deliver explosives to a target area more quickly than conventional artillery. And at the end of the Lebanese Civil War in 1990, despite the agreement that they had asking for the disbanding of all Lebanese and non-Lebanese militias, which would include the SLA, the Southern Lebanese Army, and also Hezbollah and all the other groups as well, Syria at the time controlled Lebanon, and they actually allowed Hezbollah to maintain their arsenal and also control the Shia areas along in the border with Israel that they shared. So when we look at then and now, back in the 1980s, the whole ideology of Hezbollah was described as radical, like we know today, radical Islamist. It's presented in the manifesto that they had in 1985. Their first objective was fighting against Americans and Israeli imperialism, freedom of the occupied southern Lebanon, and all other occupied territories as well, trying to gain their freedom back. Their second objective that they had was to gather all the Muslims in the concept of ummah. Ummah is the Arabic word for community. After all this, Lebanon would continue during around 1979 for the revolution of Iran, It also declared that it would protect all Lebanese communities, except for the ones that collaborated and supported Israel, and they would support all the national movements, whether they were Muslim or non-Muslims, throughout the world. However, today their ideology has been changed, and we look at Hezbollah as a left-wing political party focused on social injustice. So when looking at them as a whole in regards to terrorism, I believe that they are a terrorist group, so as do many others. All the tactics that they use instill fear and terror in multiple groups, especially those people in Lebanon, and them terrorizing the people in Israel trying to fight for their freedom back. So all in all, when looking at Hezbollah, I feel like they're a very dangerous group. They're still around today. They stopped in between 2000 and 2009. However, they are still active today, but we don't hear of them as much as we used to.